I take a shower. Otherwise, it would have been ugly. My hair was. Oh. Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the North Branford Planning and Zoning regular meeting for Thursday, September 20th. In attendance are regular members DeFrancisco and Mace and Dulac. First order of business would be. We didn't do the minutes for.
We did. We changed
We
the
did
order.
when Bill got here.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yep, we did at the end. Okay. So the first order would be for the minutes from our last meeting, which was September 6th, which all three of us were there. So if you want to take a look at that and see if there's anything, look good to me, but just take a minute. You're all set, somebody can make a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes on September 6th.
I second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Passes 3-0. That's yours.
Thank you.
That's mine. All right, so what we have is a couple, two public hearings that were continued from last meeting, 2018-10, which is the age-restricted housing district, ARHD. And the second one, which is affiliated with, is 50 Fowler Road. So do you have any updates?
I just wanted to state that in your packet, there was information from the town attorney's office, which was a document called the Housing for Older Persons Act, or HOPA, of 1995. And that just kind of went through what's permitted under the Federal Fair Housing Act. And essentially it said that it's up to the, after talking with the town attorney's office, it's at the commission's discretion as far as if you'd like to have the regulation be set at 80%, a minimum of 80%. Sorry, right? Is that, am I saying it correctly? It could be right now it's 100% of the
minimum could be
over
80%.
55.
The minimum could be 80%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So at least 80%.
Right.
It could be higher, but it's at the commission's discretion if you'd like to change that. And then that would leave 20% that could be under the age of 55. And we are still in the 35-day time period for holding a public hearing, which expires September 20th, which is today. So if you did want to continue the public hearing after this tonight's meeting, you would have to grant an extension for both applications.
Right.
Just to keep that in mind.
Right.
Good evening, Carl Porto again for the applicant. Following up on your question, and I've spoken to Barbara Schallenberg, Town Council, in connection with the question that the commission really left us with in terms of this application is what flexibility did we have regarding the age restriction statute? And both Barbara and I agree that the federal statute does permit or does mandate at least 80% of the project has to be for people 55 and older. The remaining 20% is flexible in terms of if you want to make it 85-15 or whatever, that is subject to the commission's discretion. You had also asked a sort of a sub-question to that, could we change within that 20% or other part, make it 50-50 or 45? Both Barbara and I agreed that that would not be permissible under the statute, that it's written as an 80-20, it's 55 and over for that part, and it's under for the other part, and that the under is not subject to just say an arbitrary floor. Which I know is something that you asked. We did vet it, and she and I both agreed that that would be uncharted territory that we both thought would violate the federal statutory scheme. So hopefully that answers the two questions that you left us with. I just do want to point out that in preparation for tonight's hearing, and I spoke to Kerry just a couple hours ago, we had done some cutting and pasting on the proposed text amendment, as you were aware, and went through a couple iterations. During, I think, one of the final iterations, the Section 42C elderly, special use permit for elderly developments, a subsection fell out of the proposed text. It's the exact same text that is in section 38 regarding the ARHDs, which is who can live there, the person over 55, the spouse of somebody under, related to them, the independent healthcare worker. So in the material I emailed to Carrie today, I literally cut and pasted that language so that, assuming you agree to text amendments, those who could live in any part of the project would be exactly the same, so that the treatment would be homogeneous across the project, which I think makes both sense and what was intended. So I just want to bring to you attention that there was a small clerical error. We've caught it. The correct language is now with the town, and probably, I assume, in your packages. It's not new language. It's the same language as in one. It's now in both sections.
So do you want to take the time now? I'm just going to pass down for the commission.
Sure.
Do you have a preference of which one you go through first, the
No.
elder?
There
Well, yeah,
really,
let's stick with 2018-10 first.
Right, no, I'm just wondering
Oh.
as far as the elderly development text amendment.
Or the
it's-
ARHD.
Or the ARHD text amendment. So there's two different sections where the language is very similar.
Oh, okay.
Where there's the proposal, so I'm gonna pass down the elderly development.
sure.
So this is, what you have here is what exists today. So just so you can see it. Then what I'm going to pass down next is the track changes, and this was essentially the same thing, was in your original packet. So there were track changes showing what the proposed changes are, and then what versus what exists today. And then this is a clean copy, so no track changes of the proposed.
Let's keep this over here for now.
It's a little easier to look through, I think the track changes, it obviously pulls out what we've proposed to change.
But let me ask you, on 42C1.
Yes.
So it's, it says at least 80%, but if the federal statute exists that allows it, do we actually have to put it in here?
Can we just refer to it?
Can we?
No, because if we change the percentage.
Right, but what I'm saying is
Our regulation doesn't reference the federal statute currently.
well, I'm just saying, instead of those changes, just refer to that. Because what if the federal regulation changes in a couple of years, I'm not saying it will, but then it could reflect on this instead of having to go back and change it. Just a thought. That's more just kind of like.
This is how we traditionally have done it. I don't think there's any movement to change the federal statute that I'm aware of, but we could maybe add, and maybe at the end of the day, depending on how the commission ultimately votes, I'd be happy to vet the final language with town council just to make sure we have the syntax correct, and if we want to make a back reference to the federal statute in case it changes, certainly I've done that before.
Yep. The only thing I would do, Carrie, somewhere in here, about when you talk about the 80-20, is we said that it's not the entire, it's the actual units that have a COO.
Yeah, certificate of
So
occupancy.
we should somehow, I think we should incorporate that in there as well. That could.
Okay,
So then
right.
if somebody doesn't think, if they come in with 200, okay, we build 50, 40 of them, if it's 20%, I'm doing bad math, but yeah, 40 of them out of the 50 can be used for different ages.
And that may come at the stage of an approved project?
If I could comment, the federal statutory scheme, which we've referenced before and will be in the constituent documents, it goes through how that calculus is done, so you can't load up, which I think is what you're suggesting.
I just want to make sure it's somewhere in here.
Yeah, it really falls into the condominium documents. If you look at the text of the federal regulation, it talks about how you do the calculus and what you can count and what you can't count, which I think is what you're talking about, so that developers can't essentially, not sure the right word, but finagle the numbers to make up something that we'd anticipate. Because obviously the project has to be developed as we go, and we're not gonna put up 200 houses all on day one, and you don't know who's gonna fill them, so it sort of builds on itself as you get more units. It's 80 and 20 or whatever the applicable percentage
But even in
is as we go.
even this document about the, for all the, that was provided to us, it still just says occupied. At least 80% of the occupied units. So, I mean, it has occupied, doesn't have,
Which one is that? Oh, in the
Yeah.
HOPA?
yeah.
You have to have it occupied under the federal statute to be counted towards the 80%. So you can't build them, leave them open, and then say, I've got age-restricted housing. The developer and the association will be out of compliance with the federal statute. That's
Okay.
why the word occupied is there.
I gotcha. So if you have 20 currently occupied by over 55, and you're at and you have 20%, that means 4 of the remaining units can be opened up to somebody less than 55.
Assuming the math is correct, yes.
Right.
And doing math in my head is not my strong suit either.
Okay. All right, that makes some sense.
So they get more that are occupied by 55, and you keep
Yeah.
going with the other end.
So if we got to 100, because I can do that math, you have 80 and 20.
Yeah, so if the first, they would have to, if it was 80-20, they would have to do, they would have to have 5 occupants before they could have 1 under 55. So they'd have to have 5 over 55, and then they can have 1 under 55.
Yeah, it falls on the
Yeah.
developer to
Yeah.
get all that going, all that.
So, I mean, here, the whole thing that I was driving at with this age thing is that, you know, you're talking about, you know, limiting, you know, like, somebody can only have somebody in the house for 6 months, and it can only be somebody over 18 if you're, you know, and all that stuff. But what happens if you have a couple who purchase a unit and decide to have a family? So you have no recourse. They own it. They're not gonna be, you can't force them to sell it. So you start having, you know, I'm just saying, I'm looking at the, you know, apartment or condo type issue that, you know, so you cannot eliminate that.
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, if somebody under 40, under 55 purchases it, it's a couple,
Yes.
and they decide to expand the family by having a child or adopting, whatever it is, you can't, there's no, the regulation, I mean, the condo association wouldn't be able to stop something like that. So families, you can have families in there. In
Theoretically.
Right.
Yes. Up to a certain percentage, yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, but according to, you know, what you're saying here is that, what was it, if there was a child under 18, they can only be there for 6 months?
No, actually, we've eliminated that section. It's just really over 18 now is where we're trying to draw the line.
So,
Okay.
it is an interesting question, though. So under age restrictions, under A, parenthesis F, it says a child or dependent person of an occupant pursuant to A and B above, and except in the case of emergencies or hardship. So, you know, could
hardship.
someone argue that
It-
that's
it
a
is.
hardship, that
Right.
just to go through that scenario?
Well, that's why the federal regulation provides 20%. If you have it 100%, and everyone on the project has to be over 55, you end up in a myriad of headaches. There's an emergency situation, there's a couple, one's 60, one's 50, the one that's 60 passes away. There are just, the federal statute just reflects
Well, no,
that there's a variety of problems you
that's why I
have to deal
said
with.
before, is that I don't have an issue where if a spouse passes away, you know, if you have, if one person is over 55 and a spouse, that person who has sole ownership passes away or whatever, and the ownership's passed to that other occupant,
Mhm.
I don't think anybody has an issue with that.
Right, well, we can only discriminate based on age as permitted by the federal statute. So, you know, that's all of us, not just this town. That's how it works countrywide. So this is the statutory scheme that the government is provided to us. But you can't then discriminate on somebody who's 35 and has a wife that's 28. You can't make that discriminatory regulation.
Oh, no, I'm not saying there's no discriminatory in there. I'm just saying if there's a younger spouse, I mean, if it's all over 55 is what I'm getting at, that if somebody passes away and the ownership and the other occupant is under 55, I don't think anybody has an issue with that.
Right, and if it was, and I think what you're saying is if everyone had to be 55, we'd be stuck. That's where the problem arises.
Right.
Right.
But do you have to write that in? Why does it have to be written in? Why can't it just be into the condo guidelines or whatever?
your regulations required only over 55. So we need to broaden it to comply with the federal statute. You could make it all over 55, but we think that is a problematic approach because for all the reasons we've talked about, there are circumstances.
No, I'm saying is you wrote it in here.
Yeah.
Right, so I mean, it's there, I'm saying, there's no issue with that. Just saying that completely under 55, the 80/20 is where I'm struggling with a little bit on this.
Because of the family piece of somebody.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Can
I
you-
mean, because this was originally all 55 and older housing, and my concern is, especially with this new part we're putting in, and we're doing that first, originally, going back to the 7 years ago, it was all starting up top, and they were gonna do like a couple different phases of the larger portion on top. Now we're starting down on the bottom. My concern is the rest of the area, you know?
Why-
Sure, but it's at whatever is built at the time. So for.
I just wanna see the whole project complete, that's what I'm getting at. I know what you're talking about, but I'm saying, I'm looking at the whole project. I've been through this for 7, 8 years, in about 5 different, times this came up. So, that's my major concern is that we start on the bottom and what happens to the rest of it.
Well, remember, the overlay zone is simply to create some flexibility for how we construct the project at where it meets Notch Hill. The regulations that we're talking about, and it's the reason why I mentioned in the beginning, the regulations, how it's gonna be built, how it's gonna be developed, and how it's gonna be occupied is completely homogeneous. The ARHD overlay zone is only been proposed because it provides some flexibility in how we build the entrance. Short of that, the regulatory scheme and who's gonna live there is completely homogeneous. So whether we started on Fowler Road and came down, started on Notch Hill and came up, or both, all the same requirements are gonna apply.
No, I understand. I'm just looking at the whole project. You know, my concern was that the original project was the larger portion of it.
It still is.
No, I mean, according to what we talked about last week, the first portion would be this new section. It's gonna be done first.
Only really for purposes of phasing. There's been no
But that's
representation.
what I'm getting at. I mean, that's what I'm getting at.
But I think, so just to kind of bring it back to the text amendment, which is what we're talking about now, the text amendment applies to the whole town, so it's not just for this project.
understand that.
So just to
Yeah,
keep
good
it
point.
back to
Yep.
the text
Thank you.
amendment, I don't know if it's helpful to go through the wording here and just read through it.
If you start with actually the ARHD regulation,
Right, let me pass that
if
one
you
out.
start with that one,
So this is what exists today. This is the proposed change.
if we start with this, you will see that the only change that we've made as to who can live there is subsection F, which is essentially a child or a dependent of a person in an emergency situation. That's the only change we've made or proposing to make as to who can live there. B through E are your current regulation. So we basically just created a hardship concept, all right? We then, just to talk about the parts, I've lifted that language, A through F, and I've inserted it in the elderly development one, so that the whole project will be treated the same. So it's essentially your language with one hardship provision. It'll be applied site-wide, because it's now in both zones. Then I've added B, which is the exact same language in both, that basically says, this is how you comply with the federal statutory scheme. It's housing intended for people over 55. It goes into the 80%. The community has to publish and adhere to policies that demonstrate it's age restricted. We've got to meet the rules for verifying it's an age restricted community, and that 20% can be occupied by individuals who are under 55. That is sort of the language that we typically pull out of the federal statute that says to everybody, this is how you know it's a compliant project. And then I've added subsection C, which basically says how you prove it, which Carrie has seen this language is about 2 pages of text that go through how one goes through the mechanism of proving and continuing to approve year after year that you're a compliant project. So the only real substantive change we've made is to add a hardship provision to both sections, provide the language that tells us that we're following the federal statute regarding age-restricted projects, and then C says, if you're gonna do this, you gotta put in your documents the things that you gotta do to make sure you stay in compliance. And we wanna put that language in both sections so that our project is uniform throughout.
Some of the wording, I mean, since we have some flexibility on it, should we note that planning and zoning can, so it doesn't have to be 80-20. That we can vary from that.
Well, isn't that what we might decide?
Right, I would
today?
decide on a number, we don't wanna do a
Don't put
case by case
flexibility.
for every, project that comes before us, I wouldn't think.
Well, there's a difference between a project like this and one at that might be 16.
But Harry, this applies to all parts of the town. It's
I
not
get
just,
that.
it's not just this.
No, that's what I'm saying.
So-
You have a larger one like this, but
Yeah.
say you had a smaller one with 20 on it, so.
It'd still be the ratio.
I know, but I mean, does it,
It'd be
Does
no
it fit?
difference for this if they started with, I know it's going a little outside from the text amendment to the other part as we're looking at the map, but, okay, phase one, phase whatever it is, however it's completed, this could be a small, project, or it could be completely done, who knows?
well, this one would be 40, and if you had a smaller one with 20, it would be 4. So.
It'd still be the same all across the town.
Yeah, and I know that's what I'm getting at. I'm not sure if if you
Well,
look at different
well,
sized projects that make.
If we wanna change it, we should just change it and have it in writing rather than the flexibility on it, whereas is it the 80-20 or is it 90-10? Cause right now it's 100%.
Yeah.
And we understand there are hardships. I don't think the condo association or whatever developments are gonna dispute like the spouse stuff. But, I don't know, it shouldn't just be flexibility for, case by case. Cause Carrie, is this the second one now in town? Or would this be the second one in town now for age restrictions?
Yes, so Montgomery Village is one, and I think this would be the second, and Evergreen Woods is another, so actually that's another example.
So in case
So this would be the third.
if we did for flexibility in this, could the others come back or a new one come and be like, oh, well, they have that, can we do that for this now? Type thing.
Yeah, that's a
That'd
good
bring
question,
They
right?
could.
Potential down
They
the
could.
road,
Yeah, they could.
rather
That's,
than just be
well,
like
we'd have
blanket
to look at the
across.
approval. I would think that we would have to look at the approval, because it would be based on their approval at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't imagine moving forward, everything gets all of a sudden
They can
grandfathered.
reapply that.
But it's already built,
Yeah, you know that.
so I don't know.
So I see what you're saying, Harry, that I'm just gonna be super transparent with my thoughts, even though they might seem kind of mean. Why, so right, the spirit of 55 and over seems to me just no children. Yet, when you have the 80-20, the 20 can allow children. I mean, I'm gonna be transparent. Just again, playing devil, why can't we say the no children under 18? Like, why can't, like, if a couple has a child, why can't we say, okay, like, you violated, like, write something in
Yeah.
here and then say,
Cause it can fall under
You-
hardship. I mean, that's a hardship. They,
or you have like a,
but they own it.
within X
so they
amount of
can't-
time.
Yeah, they own it. They can't force them to sell it.
Unless there's something in
Can
the
you put
condo
something
right
in
up
there?
I don't, yeah.
or technically do that.
cause I
I'm gonna
comprehend that.
I'm gonna
You
say
want-
that there's no way you can force somebody to sell, and I'll leave it up to you, but if you, I don't see there's any regular.
I see the spirit of 55 and over is like not dealing with children and teenagers. And there are plenty of young couples who under 55, we don't
As the
want
way we've
children to have-
proposed it is not less than 18, which I think Barbara agrees we can do,
Yeah,
so.
but
so-
that doesn't, again, you have the word hardship in there, and you can do anything with that word. You could just say, I mean, hardship, we adopted a child, that's a hardship on the child, we were pregnant, that's a, you know, it's, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but the word hardship and trying to fight that from a condo association, one, you're not gonna spend the money to go to lawsuits against somebody that brings in a child, you know, whether, you know, pregnancy, adopted, whatever it might be. So, I mean, there's gonna be really no recourse
So
on
even
that.
if it is 100% 55 and over, and some grandparents have to have their grandkid, how
Yeah.
does that get enforced?
That's a hardship, that can fall under hardship.
It
Even
would be
6
up
months.
to the association
Yeah.
to enforce.
So the kid's there for a year, how's that any?
Well, it's in the regulation right now as it stands that you could, I think it's up to a certain amount of time. or-
They took that out.
I mean, I'm sorry, but only if there's a hardship. But you can say, if you're a grandparent and something happens to, you know, you know, the mother and father, and you have I mean, it's gonna be more than, if, you know, after 6 months or whatever, the child's gonna be with you. You can't, you know, you can't tell them to.
And my question is, how does that get enforced? So
Condo association.
it's a similar circumstance that can arise if a young couple didn't plan on having children, but then they
Yeah.
suddenly get pregnant. So it could also possibly be a moot point.
Yeah.
There could be children there no matter, or teenagers there no matter what, even if it is 100%.
Right. And these regulations were built on the spirit of 55 and older. That's where I'm having a tough time, because we spent a lot of time on developing the
So-
55 and older specifically.
And the hardship, the hardship was in also our original,
No.
It was strictly 55 and older.
why is hardship in there now? Because of the federal regulation?
No, it's not part of it's not part of the federal regulatory scheme. We just added it as part of our experience. That's the type of thing where you end up in situations where, as you said, you know, an elderly couple has, you know, one of them has a child, and that child has a child, and the mother or father passes away, and all of a sudden you end up with a headache. And you know, the reality is certain people are gonna need, you need to have a certain amount of flexibility in an age-restricted project. You're just never gonna get everybody there over 55. It just doesn't work.
So Harry, focusing on the text amendment,
Yeah.
would you entertain, because I know right now in town it's 100%, would you entertain somewhere in between
Oh,
this and
I mean,
100?
I'm entertaining the whole thing. I haven't made my mind up
No, I
either
know,
way.
but is it possible?
I don't know what the number would be.
Reduce,
I haven't got to that point yet.
it could be arbitrary right now, and
Yeah.
it'd be like, so, somewhere in the middle, because of how the town currently is, and like I said, the spirit of when the town did this originally was for complete elderly,
Right.
and have that. This is what the federal regulations
Oh, yeah,
are.
I'm just playing a little devil's advocate here.
How big
I
is
understand.
Montgomery Village?
That's a good question.
I thought it was, isn't it twos? High 100s?
No, I don't
No?
think so. I was going to say 50 units, but.
Oh, really? Oh, they're doubles, they're duplexes, that's right.
So even in there, if there's a family that has a hardship, nobody in there can
Well, we don't
bring
know
a
what
child.
we don't know what they can have different condo rules. And no, we don't know what they have for their condo rules, but it's 55 and older, I believe.
So in their
Yeah.
condo
Yeah.
rules, they can have a hardship piece?
Yep. And it should be. I mean, there's time, you bought it as, you know, and then all of a sudden you gotta sell it because you have a hardship, I don't think that's fair to you.
No, and I'm
Yeah.
just trying to
Oh,
agree,
yeah, I'm with
like,
you.
why, like, is having the hardship built into the regulation significant or not, especially if a condo association can build it into their rules? So I'm just trying to,
Well, this is saying it's gotta
Flesh out
be, it
what-
has to be in their rules.
no, but
Yeah.
if in the original 55 and over, there was no hardship, but a condo association puts it in, does it really matter if it is in our regs or not? I'm
Well, I
just
don't know,
trying to
I don't know what
comprehend
their,
everything.
what their rules are, but what they're putting in here is that it will be in the rules that the only way is a hardship. So it has to be, we don't know what Montgomery Village did. Maybe they don't have anything. You know, maybe they strictly say no children, and that's, or no matter what.
But,
It's possible.
but even though the regs didn't speak, original regs didn't speak to that, if the condo association did put it in, there could be children over in Montgomery Village for X amount of time.
Could be.
I'm just trying to understand
Yeah.
words being somewhere and other places.
Yeah, I mean,
and
let's, yeah, but,
what real life looks like.
yeah, but
'Cause-
we don't, this is what we got though, yeah, I mean.
Okay.
So, I mean, whatever happened in the past, this is the
So I
new
think
regulation.
from the town perspective, having that, section in there for emergencies or hardships opens up the opportunity, if there is an emergency or hardship, for that child to live there. Or dependent person under the age of 55 to be there. So, as Attorney Porto mentioned, so if you look at the age-restricted housing district, you'll remember that this commission heavily vetted those regulations 2 years ago, or I forget when that was originally done. It wasn't that long ago, though, and you spent a lot of time on the sections A through E. And it's, again, just adding, their proposal is to add F, which would open it up to that, that emergency or hardship. And then B and C is that 80-20, just clearly calling that out. So that's the main difference between what we have. And then the elderly developments were originally written in the 90s, I want to say. Or actually 87. And then there were some changes in 2005 and 98. But that did not have anything in there about if the spouse of someone who's 55 is less than 55, they could also live there. So that language that you had worked with for the age restricted is also being proposed for the elderly development.
So I got a question on 38.3, A, number C, which talks about a personal care attendant who's in service to residents 55 years or older. So if you do make this 80-20, then do you also have to change that with no age on it?
Say that again?
Okay.
Yep.
38.3,
Mhm.
section A, I'm sorry, E.
Okay, I was gonna
Yeah.
say you said C.
So it says a personal care attendant who is in service to a resident of 55 years of age or older. If we're gonna make this less than 100%, so you could have somebody who's under 55 that might require some assistance, so I don't know if we should change that.
I don't think you need to make that change. Because once you have somebody 55 living in the house, that's what qualifies it as housing for the elderly. You have a series of other things that other people who can live there,
Oh,
including
okay.
this
I
other
should-
person.
Oh, wait, I'm in the wrong, I should go, when we get to elderly developments, okay, I got you.
Well, it's exactly the
Okay,
same in both.
Well,
It's exactly the same in both.
but if you have somebody living in the 20% that are under 55 and need medical care, then.
Yeah, so just say a resident. Take out
Remember
the
what
age.
That's what I'm getting
qualifies.
at.
No.
I don't,
No.
remember how it qualifies. So we've got 100 units.
Right.
We've got 80 of them with at least one person over 55.
Right.
That is a federally qualified, age-restricted house.
Okay.
You then have a series of other things that you guys have decided over the years that you can live there. So you could have a spouse that's 52, you could have a healthcare attendant who's maybe 35, probably somebody a little bit younger. The 20% just represents, let's assume one of those people who's over 55, let's assume they relocate to Florida. They want to sell their house, and there's a nice Yale couple who's 25 and 26.
Right.
All right, they want to buy in this project. They're the people who get counted into the 20% percentile.
Correct. No, yeah, what I'm saying is how if that, instead of a couple from Yale, there's one person under 55
Mhm.
that would like to purchase one of those units under the 20%, but also requires medical care.
I think it has anything to do with, one has anything to do with the other.
Because you're saying,
No,
Okay.
this is,
all right.
yeah, the person, it's the,
Just any personal
Oh, I'm
care
saying,
attendant.
okay, they're part of the 80%.
they're part of the 80%.
Okay,
And
yeah.
in that HOPA document, it specifically
Yeah,
called
I got
out
it. Yep.
Who
what
else?
qualifies it. So even if there is someone who's 55 and then under 55 caring for the person who's
Got it. I got
55,
it.
that counts
Yeah.
towards the 80, not the
Yeah.
20.
Gotcha.
Exactly right.
Yep.
Not everyone is really 55, even in a 55.
Yep, it wouldn't
Project.
matter, it wouldn't matter in that 20%.
No.
And
So-
just one other clarification, so this is talking about occupants of the building.
Right.
So, meaning I could, if I'm under 55, I could actually purchase the home for my
Your
parents.
Very popular, as I said, I've done the Sunrise project, this developer has done Sunrise, we're almost to 142 units. We have more than ample examples where, you know, elderly couples, children end up becoming the title holders for estate planning purposes, but they can't live there. You know, under the, again, the 80-20, their parents live there, they own it, so it's the occupant. Title and who owns it is really not relevant to any of the analysis.
So let me ask you this too, then. So we got both of these working. I'm just thinking, and I'm just gonna toss it out there. How if we made one 80-20 and the other not? I'm just,
So
no, I'm
it's
just,
up to
I'm
the
just, I'm just
commission,
throwing it
yeah.
out there, you,
It's
okay.
Well,
Yeah.
in my head, I was just thinking.
Cause I'm thinking that the, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry, I didn't wanna cut you off.
Something similar, like, again, I'm gonna be a grumpy, pretend I'm a grumpy elderly person who no longer likes children, like, do people, I don't know if we can do this, but again, I'm gonna be super transparent. Can, again, children can be anywhere, but if, do the people under 55, under the 20% or whatever percent it is or isn't, can we say you live in a certain area? That
Well-
way, if there are grown.
It-
Tricia,
What's
I
the
Oh, you
lines?
know,
These two.
no, you can, we can do
I
it by
know,
the,
like-
you do it by the regulation.
Yeah.
So what happens is, I'm just gonna throw it out there, this is the overlay, and this is the elderly housing. So if you.
80-20 here.
Well,
but
no,
then
well, I'm
vice
just saying that,
versa.
well, remember, don't say, I mean, here, this would be.
This is it, you're right,
Right.
thank you, yep.
So
We
if
often
we
do
kept
that.
the, you can, it's possible to consider keeping elderly housing at
That
a
seems the best of
percentage or
both
not.
worlds.
I mean, it's something we can discuss, though, I'm just saying that, it just came to me that we have to look at some properties in town.
Could we technically do that?
Existing, what's that?
Could we technically do that, or it has to be both
They're
one
two,
or the
no,
other?
they're two separate.
Yeah, I think you can choose to have an
'Cause then you could just
80-20
steer to 55 and over.
in one of the sections of the zoning regulation and different in the other. I don't think that you could say that the 20%
Somebody
under
lives in
25
a
have to
certain
be
area on the
limited
property.
to, units 1 through 20.
Right, 'cause
Um,
the elderly housing overlay was based off of some residential property
Mhm.
and different things like that. Got to go back in there versus with the elderly housing ones, so.
I mean, I'm all
it's-
about flexibility, cause I understand the spirit of 55 and over, and supporting that, but also creating flexibility for life, that seems like.
Can I register a comment?
Entertaining.
And I appreciate what you're saying, and of course, I'm advocating for the developer, but I have to tell you, I think your 42C, which I think was developed a long time ago, it contemplates 100% 55 years and older for everybody. That, candidly, I think is both atypical and as a practical matter, problematic. I appreciate the notion that you guys want an age-restricted project in this part of town, and there was a lot of emphasis put into it. But I think if you go back to the original language of 42C1, it just says elderly shall mean a person who's 55 years of age and older, and if applicable, his or her spouse. If we did 200 units under that situation, we'd have to have 200 occupants, or if they're married, 400, all over 55.
Gotcha.
That would be almost impossible. You're also going to, even if we figured out a way to sell them, let's assume one of them wants to move to Florida, and they can't find somebody over 55 to buy their house. They're now stuck with a home, they can't sell. So you really create.
Oh, no, and I'm gonna stop you there because I was thinking the reverse. Because that was my thing is the elderly housing, could potentially have a larger footprint than the overlay. So I was thinking completely the opposite of what you're thinking.
Oh.
I was thinking because of the properties that, and I'd have to go back and look at it, from when we did the
Yeah.
overlay and look at it, but I don't think there was this big massive properties where the overlay would fit. There was only a few and they were sort of small. I don't, I don't remember, so now I'm thinking, maybe the elderly housing regulation I consider that, but the overlay, since it was meant to be slightly smaller, and at least the properties in town being smaller, I would like to see those maybe stay at 100%. I mean, I'm gonna be open-minded to consider any percentages as well, but that's where I was going.
It would be, you'd have less number of units that potentially be problematic, but I still think the notion of trying to fully restrict any reasonable sized project into 100% 55 creates dynamics that, while good intentions on the front end, I mean, I think we're all trying to get to the right spot. I just, I think the easiest one to envision is a couple that's 60 decides, I've had it with Connecticut winters, I'm moving to Florida. They can't find somebody to buy their house. I mean, there's no flexibility now. I mean, if the next person who wants to buy is 52, they're like, listen, I'm 3 years away, I can't buy. I mean, you end up, I mean, and that's just one that I can easily, come off the top of my head, and you could see how it would come up. I mean, people, more on the age, they do ultimately sell and move to Florida, or they pass away and their kids have to sell the home. If you stifle the ability to move residential product, I think that is ultimately a problem at some level.
The ARHD was meant for smaller properties.
Oh, I don't mean to say smaller properties, I don't think.
So,
maybe
well, no,
small.
it was
Or
5
projects.
it's
Yeah.
limited by 5 to 15 acres, that's
As I
in
say,
the
it's limited
to
regulations,
15
and it's
acres.
limited at location.
Yeah.
So like,
We don't have to get it, I mean, we can have that, we deliberate a little bit, I mean, so we don't have to, try to solve the percentages or yes or no
Sure.
at this moment, but if you have, I mean, go ahead and keep on going on your thought, I just wanna,
Well, the thing is, and it's hard to do with this, cause both applications meld together and keep bouncing back and forth. Do we wanna keep talking on the text amendment, open it up, and then go to the map part? Cause I feel like we keep jumping ahead.
we can't
and
do that. The map shouldn't be, we don't even consider that.
No, but we keep asking, so, and we keep using it as an example of, okay, we're looking at the overlay versus elderly.
Right.
And going back and forth on that. And obviously, this piece of property that's being considered, that's why you have the text amendment, everything else like that, but I don't know, I feel like we're focusing on the text amendment and then we keep getting wrapped up into,
The other
let's say,
approach you
spot
could
situations.
perhaps take, if the town planner thinks it passes, you could try to create some additional language in your regulatory scheme that, if your project, let's call it, in total is greater than 25 acres, you're entitled to one treatment. If it's greater than, 50 acres, you make a sliding scale. I mean, as we've talked about, as you get to bigger projects, you just have to have a little bit more flexibility because you just have too much product that sort of hem in. I mean, you don't want to create a spot zoning situation here, but, you could take an approach that, it's maybe 80-20 for projects that are in their totality, which this is, even though we have this overlay, it's still clearly one contiguous project by one developer, and we would stipulate that it's one project, not to be broken up. You could treat it that way, and then, so we've got some 90 acres, but I mean, if you took like a 50-acre breakpoint, you could say, 50-acre project plus is 80-20, 50-acre below is 90-10. It's just sort of trying to think creatively to give the commission a different option.
So, using that as an example, the, age-restricted housing district is, again, limited to 5 to 15 acres.
That's small.
So, that
That could be where.
could be different, just because the,
Yeah.
required parcel size is different.
Yeah.
And then
I
just
like that.
thinking about the two, age-restricted housing districts, again, between 5 to 15 acres, it has to be a transition zone, so either residentially zoned next to industrial, or industrially zoned next to
That's the one we need to
residential.
begin with.
And then, elderly development is permitted in residential or in business or industrial zones, but there's no limit on acreage.
Will you say that again?
There's no limit on the size of the parcel, but it is permitted in residential, business, or industrial zones.
Which, the elder houses?
That's for the
Mhm.
elderly. Gary, now, say whatever happens with the Second Amendment, when developer comes for site plan, all that, and how the hardships have been constantly brought up for, whether it's for a selling point or, heaven forbid, they have like this one or two parcels that they can't sell and anything like that. Could there be language in there for, okay, for, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there, but how many years it can't be sold because of that age requirement? Could it then be opened up according to the condo association coming to the town and showing a hardship? Or is that plausible, or is that just can't happen?
I would say that we
I don't know.
wouldn't state in here what that
Oh, no, I
timeline is,
understand.
but they could come, the association could come to us at any point. I mean, we could, depending on what happens, if there is a change that happens, you know, whatever's decided for the percentage, the association could come back to us 2 years from now saying, you know what, we can't fill all of these even though we've built them, so we need to drop it down more, or we wanna, I don't know how they would lift it entirely, because it's built per zoning based on spacing and everything else based on zoning for an elderly development, but I would think that they could come back. That was kind of the scenario I was posing like 15 years out from now.
Yeah.
Just thinking about, could you fill these units? There's clearly demand now, and I think that it's
What
good
happens in
fit, it fits the
demographic
zoning
changes, or-
regulations, but it would be up to the association to come back to do another text amendment. But I don't know that, they wouldn't even have to really pose a hardship, it would just be proposing a text amendment or some kind of change, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be like any project that's somewhere mid-stride, if you needed an amendment to the regulations for whatever may be applicable to it. You had a setback problem, you ultimately hit a ledge. I mean, there's a million reasons why a developer in the middle of a project may need to come back to council and say, we need relief. But you're never gonna get below the 80%, that's just the risk the developer runs. You couldn't give them 75% even if you thought it was a great idea,
Do you have any other questions?
Well, no, I was
Text
gonna open,
amendment?
the public hearing's still open, so if we don't have anything else, I was gonna ask if anybody wanted to speak from the public. So we've been discussing the first part of the public hearing tonight, which is application 2018-10. That's regard to the text amendment, and you've heard some of the discussion. If anybody would like to speak on the, some of the comments that have been made? Yep.
Scott Small, not sure, but I'm just asking for a clarification here. So if I'm 40 years old and I have 5 kids, can I buy the
Oh,
unit?
yeah,
Am I-
Scott, direct to me, and he'll answer them all at the end.
Okay,
All right,
well,
perfect.
so
Yeah.
a family with 5 kids, can that be part of the 20%? Or is that, was there something that you said that you really can't be 18 unless, of course, there's a hardship? That's what I'm trying to
Okay.
figure out.
Yeah, we'll have them answer your questions.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we'll get all the questions first, and then you can answer them all. Would anybody else like to speak? Please, just state your name and address.
Kevin Kennedy, 27 Wildwood Road. I'm at the tail end of the site of the project. There's a shear drop that is developed from the rock processing and whatnot that's gone as part of this project now. And I'm just wondering if you're taking into consideration bringing in the younger tenants to this project and how they're gonna handle that dangerous area.
The what?
There's a shear drop of about 40 feet. that's
Well,
been
this is just a
created.
text amendment, so this is regarding.
Well, you're talking about the 80-20?
Yeah.
And if you
yeah,
let the kids come
yeah,
into this project with
yeah.
that area there, I'm wondering what the risk is for those kids, and it'll be on their side of the project.
Okay. Would anybody else like, yep, please. Name and address, please. It's been a while.
It's been a while, yes. Donna Persley, Marjorie Drive. People are buying houses in the 55-plus community because they want something quiet and peaceful. Like she said, we're a bunch of grouchy old people who don't like kids. Okay. I don't like the idea of 55 being elderly. That kind of bothers me.
I'm with you.
And don't forget that the 10th Amendment applies to the entire town, so it's not just this one property. The age restriction, okay, so each household has to have somebody over 55, which means you can have a couple, someone's 57, spouse is 54. Now, can they bring their adult children? 22, 30? It's not, I mean, it just, you're assuming it's a couple when their kids have moved out, but nowadays, you know, kids live home while they're going to college. Kids come out of college, they can't get a job, they're living home for much, much longer. And if you have grown children in their 20s, they're just as noisy as the kids in their teens. You have those loud pickup trucks going back and forth, you have the ATVs. So, I mean, you could have families, no children, but, you know, no young children, you could still have families, I'm guessing, in the 55 plus, because it still qualifies. Now, if you add to that, an additional 20% of these can have people that are not 55, you're basically have a normal residential neighborhood. You don't have anything that makes this a quiet, peaceful 55 plus community. The only difference between this and a normal neighborhood is that the houses here are much more close together. I don't see the difference. Take my neighborhood, it would qualify. 80% of the people are probably over 55 in my neighborhood. We still got the ATVs going up and down the streets, and they're not usually the kids. And yeah, it sounds like I don't see a reason why we need to have the 80-20. I mean, you could have something different. If you wanted to do something, it could be 90-10, it could be 95-5, or it could just be, you know, strictly 55 plus, because that's what the spirit of this development is supposed to be for. And there's no problem putting in any kind of rule saying if one spouse passes away and the other one is younger than 55, they can stay there. That is a simple one-liner to just put in there. It's not a big deal. I mean, that could be a hardship right now with the kids. For children under 18, there's nothing really describing what a hardship is. It could be that the grandparents have bought something here, and every summer they take care of their grandkids because someone needs a babysitter. So they're really, you know, instead of 55 plus being quiet and peaceful, I don't see, even if you had 100% 55 plus, I still don't think it's going to be quiet and peaceful.
Would anybody else like to speak? Yeah, please.
Addressing the second comment first, as I said, I think as your 42C section is currently written is problematic. And while I didn't speak specifically with Barbara Schallenberg about it, I have to be honest with you, it raises the question in my mind as to whether it violates the federal statute as written. It certainly doesn't follow the federal statutory scheme in terms of one occupant over 55 and how the federal government defines age-restricted projects. So I just throw that out there. I want to be candid. I didn't discuss it with Barbara Schallenberg. I didn't, just as in the scenario that she and I had envisioned for this evening. So I have to express some concern as to whether it's enforceable as written, as a matter of federal law. I certainly think, and we've had plenty of discussion over the last two sessions now, I don't think there's really any doubt that everyone acknowledges that you need to have a certain amount of flexibility for all the myriad things of life's event that come from people dying, to people who have to move, to people who have an emergency with, God forbid, a deceased child who then has their grandchildren. I mean, there's a million different reasons, and it's why the 80-20 system really is part of the federal scheme. It's why it tends to work. I've been involved in a number of the projects. Contrary to the prior speaker, they have not traditionally been, and frankly, far from normal neighborhoods. I've been personally involved in these. I've been personally involved in the one the developer has in Orange. They're age restricted. I mean, the bottom line is older folks are buying them. I mean, we're not getting 20-year-old people coming up and having families. I mean, that's just not really how it ultimately works. Now, I understand there is some flexibility. We're talking about flexibility. We think we need flexibility. And in that regard, addressing the first comment, yes, the way we've got it written is you could have from 18 to 55. So if there was a couple in the 20% quartile or whatever the percentage is, and they're 35 and they have a 19-year-old son or daughter and they're not in college and they're living home, yeah, it'll look a little bit more like a traditional housing scenario in that limited regard. But that's how this tends to work. I don't think the federal statutory scheme, and I'm not sure, well, I'm sure it was well-intended, I don't think the town envisioned that everybody in an elderly zone was going to be 55. I don't know how the town would have thought practically you could have gotten there. It just, you know, if you got, you know, husband and wife, 60 and 50, they can't live here? I mean, they can't, you know, I think they constitute the quantity of, or the quantum of people that the town would want in an elderly zone, but under the currently written regulation, they can't buy. They can't live there. And I don't think that's what the spirit and intent of this regulation, even as written, was really intended for. So I think as we start to parse it apart, I think you know, it's readily apparent that it needs to be a little bit more flexible. And it's not just the spouse. I mean, it could be an adult child who's got to live with them who's 40. But experience tells me that these don't become regular neighborhoods. There's just too much restriction on it. And once you have the momentum, people know they're elderly things. You know, people with young children are not going to be there. So hopefully that answers both questions.
Well, the other one was if they had, if somebody, Scott's question was if, you know, if they come, so if somebody comes in and says, I only, you know, it's just me and my wife moving in, but then they have 4 kids and all of a sudden 4 kids show up, I mean.
Listen, it is.
You know what I mean? I was just making sure that, you know, because nobody can be under 18.
Right.
So, in Scott's case, you would not know about it. I mean, because obviously, if they had a couple kids under 18, they wouldn't be according to the the text here. They wouldn't be allowed to go in. But then, I mean,
they have one by accident.
No, I'm just saying. Say they have no, they just don't tell you about it.
Well, listen,
You know what I mean?
none of us can prevent against people who are, you know, devious.
Yeah.
You know, the more likely scenario is you've got a middle-aged couple and they have a child by accident. You know, it happens. I mean, it's a real-world event.
Or they adopt.
Yeah, or they adopt. I mean, you know, and I don't think that's a hardship. You know, I think hardships are, God forbid, you know, the son or daughter who has a grandson, they die in an accident. I think that's a genuine hardship. You know, it's an unintended event. Unintended pregnancy may be problematic and probably was a big surprise. I'm not sure it's exactly a hardship. I think over time you've got to ultimately move. Is there a certain transition window in every one of these projects where somebody sort of slips out of compliance? Sure, and I agree with your assertion that, you know, all of a sudden there's a 40-year-old couple, they end up having a baby by accident. No court is going to throw them out of their home on day one. I mean, I just don't think that's practical. I do think over time they can put some pressure on them and say, listen, you're not an appropriate candidate for this project. But things happen. I mean, you know, you're talking about a community of a couple hundred houses. I mean, there's going to be a variety of things that are going to happen. I mean, you know, we all live in the real world. So that's why I said I think the notion of being strictly 55, it's just, I mean, I don't want to be cavalier with it, but it's really just unrealistic. I mean, you're just not going to be able to enforce that, or you're going to spend all day in court.
Right. But the basis is nobody under 18.
That's the basis.
Okay.
You know.
In both of these, okay.
In both, yeah, and as I said, you know, the current proposal is it's the same across both boards. I understand that you guys may want to talk about a little bit about that, but as it's proposed, the text you have in front of you, it would be treated homogeneously as if the ARHD overlay just wasn't there.
Okay. Anybody else would like to speak? So the only thing that, like, we potentially like a sliding scale. Do we want to look at that? And maybe come up with some scenarios?
What exactly, I guess,
I'm not, so talk about sliding scales between the two.
based on acreage?
Yeah.
Percentage based on acreage? Is that what you?
Yeah.
Rather than one or the
But
other.
I wouldn't say a sliding scale, just because
Oh, no, I didn't mean
would
sliding scale, I'm
encourage
sorry,
it.
a scale.
Right,
Yeah.
well, right, so like, you hit this point,
Yeah.
and I think it's fairly, it's already kind of decided in that the age-restricted housing district is between
Sure.
5 and 15 acres, so that could be a
That could be the
breaking point.
scale.
I don't know
Yeah.
that.
No, that's a good point.
You could also have it broken out in elderly development, because there is no acreage requirement for that.
But a minimum of 20. In the
Say-
elderly.
Minimum of, you're saying 20%?
No, meaning the site area is
sorry.
a minimum of 20 acres for
Yep,
elderly?
yep, okay.
Which is, so is that something we wanna kinda consider? Or do you just wanna look at these two separately and that could be the scale between?
I think how we operate is we often split hairs left and right and often come back to the beginning, but I think we feel good when we do split those hairs left and
Okay.
right. I know we drive everybody crazy.
Well, the only reason
but-
I'm saying about that is because I was gonna ask for the public hearing to say, almost we can have a discussion with the applicant.
Yes.
If we.
I mean, why not? We
if-
very well say no,
Well,
we
we'd
can
have
say
to
yes,
ask,
but I would like
they
to
can say no
entertain it.
too, they can say
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
we, so, I'm just saying, I mean, if we're comfortable with saying, okay, we do have a scale, and that scale is the two different text amendments, the two different, texts, one for the elderly housing, one for the overlay, if that's our scale, then I think we've heard everything we need to hear, and we can close the public hearing. We wouldn't need to request any additional time. If we were to consider a scale within there, within the elderly housing, say like 20 to 40 acres, 40 to 80, if we're gonna consider that, then I would ask for requests for just one more meeting so we can have a discussion with Carrie, maybe put something together, and then present it to the applicant or vice versa. But so I just wanna get your take of where you feel on that. Me personally, and just giving my 1 cent, is that I think the scale, I would be good on the scale just the way it is, elderly housing overlay. But I can understand where somebody might want to scale in the elderly housing one. So I'll get your comments on that.
I think I have enough information.
All right.
I guess if you have any other questions or want to
Yeah.
leave it open or.
Well, no, I think if we got it, yeah.
I'll be the just because that's my nature, I wouldn't mind entertaining a scale within the elderly development, just because again,
Just see if there's something we can come up with.
it's because this is, I mean,
Yeah.
we're pretty thorough board, and again, we often beat a horse to death and then come back around to the beginning, and it was like, well, why'd you guys do that?
Well,
I think because we're very conscientious, and thorough, and letting the public know we're being thorough. So I would like to just entertain, and again, like not convergent thinking, but divergent thinking, and
Yeah.
looking at other scenarios, just to say we were thorough
Okay.
for our town.
Yeah, so
Can I just offer one suggestion in the context of what you're saying? Do we collectively think it's either wise or permissible to add a provision, instead of maybe creating a scale for the town as a whole, as opposed to looking at our project, reserve to the commission the right to review the percentage as it relates to a particular application?
we're trying to stay away from that, because that just keeps the door wide open.
I just,
Yeah.
I
No,
was
I
trying
mean,
to.
we were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of brought, so, let's kind of leave that open on discretion of the commission, but, I think I got knocked down pretty good. But,
Okay, I
like,
just was trying to draw out something that's,
At least 7 or 8 or 9 to 1.
that's fine, I thought I would just
Yeah,
draw it out
I
from
mean, that's one
what you
thing
were
we've
saying.
been trying, we've been trying to have our regulations tighten up a little bit, because there are things, and I'm not saying, but there are things that's a hardship in that definition. So I'm just using an example. We're trying to tighten up on our definitions and how we approach it, so if somebody wants to do something different, it needs to go to a public hearing to change any text in there in the way it should be, so the members of the public can hear what's going on, then leaving up to a discretion of 5 people on this commission that can have one train of thought, and then all of a sudden, 3 of us are gone, and 3 other people come in, and they can come up with a different train of thought.
Sure.
So we figured, let's put it in kind of solid, and if any changes need to be made, it can be done by the public, or the applicant, or the zoning
Okay,
commission.
just
Yeah.
thought I would
No,
offer.
good point, though, I was with you, so it was only 8 to 2.
I mean, is it worth it, sorry to rehash this, is it worth it to ask our town attorney for some kind, or could you propose some language along those lines that you're just speaking?
Well, I'll work with you on that, I mean, I'll come up
Yeah,
with some numbers,
absolutely.
I'll
Like,
play with some numbers.
20 to 60 is 90,
Yeah.
bigger.
No, but I'm
Well-
going back to what Attorney Porter was just
They
talking
just-
about.
Oh.
So where he would say, you know, and I don't know what the language would be, but something like, you know, housing intended for persons 55 and older, provided that, you know, I don't know if that's where you put it in, at the discretion of the commission, at least 80%, but to be.
Well, if you were
Yeah, but
trying
I don't
to-
wanna get, I don't think we should go that direction.
Right,
Discre-
if you
I don't
wanna
want-
do
I don't
this-
think it should be discretion of planning and zoning.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right, no, I
I
think if
think
you
we
wanted
should
to,
have-
you wanted to pull from the discretion, you would just create hard acreages. You know, if your project is 20 acres, you got 1 percentage.
Yeah.
If you're at over, you know, you can do breakpoint above and below some number. I mean, it depends on how many, you know, tracks are X big in your town.
Well, that's what I wanna look at, and Carrie,
Yeah.
I'll work with you on that. Yeah, we could take a peek, and, I mean, we could definitely do it before the next meeting, there's no question, I'm pretty good up into that. But the only thing I would like to ask is, would you allow us the, extension for 1 meeting?
Yeah, obviously.
Okay.
I mean, you know, we're making good progress, you know, we're gonna be back in front of wetlands and you guys for site plan, so
Okay.
to some extent, it all gets sort of wrapped up into one at the end of the day.
Okay.
Sure, we'd have no objection to a continuance to the
Okay.
next meeting, which is,
October 4th.
Yeah.
sure.
All right.
And in the interim, you know, I'm around, and Barbara, maybe we could try and parse through some language so that we, you know, we have a better,
Okay.
we're not just hashing it, if you don't wanna
Yeah.
just hash it for the next
Yeah,
time.
if you, Carrie, I will work on something, and if you wanna work on some kind of proposal as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we
can-
bring Barbara
we can
in,
look at 'em.
we may have something more concrete for you guys to then actually decide on, as opposed to just sort of kicking around concepts again.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
the next hearing, and we can bring it to some sort of
Yeah.
conclusion.
Cause I think I think we're pretty good on everything else, so we'll take a look at that. All right, so I appreciate that. Oh,
Are
so,
you keeping the public
so this public
hearing?
the public hearing for application 2018-10 will be continued to our next meeting, which is October 4th at 6:30 here in the chambers.
I second.
Well, you didn't have to second. That's okay.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So now,
Yeah, Harry, before you, go to the next,
Eric did.
well, I know you did, but this is an option for an applicant as well, for keeping the two, if you consider the two separate, or, still have the scaling system on it, would you still entertain that if one still had the scaling system on it?
Yeah.
Cause like I said,
Oh, yeah.
they don't wanna just bring concepts back and us talk
Yeah.
about, be like, trying to flesh everything out.
Yeah, I think that the overlay, being it's up to 20 acres, I mean, this is, here's what
5
I'm,
to
here's what I'm
15 is
thinking.
not even 20.
That would be just a solid percentage.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
Right, and then the elderly housing one would
Could
be the
possibly
one that
be
would be,
size
could be
scale.
scaled, or that could be a
We
solid
might talk about
percentage
it
too.
and be like, no.
Yeah,
Okay,
yep,
alright,
all right.
sorry about that.
All right, so now what do we have for 2018-11?
So that's the proposed, map
Oh,
amendment?
okay, yeah, okay, so that's the actual overlay,
Correct.
okay.
You want to do that one now?
Yeah, I'm trying to think here, do we need the other part of it first? I think we kinda need the other part first, right?
In terms of what, the,
We really shouldn't do the second part until we kinda,
Well, problem is if we
No, we
decide
could do the
something
second
for.
cause the text
overlay-
amendment, we really shouldn't even be talking about the second part, cause the text amendment has effect
No.
on the
Um,
second part,
Actually,
yeah.
Well, if we.
not necessarily,
No.
Well, not just for, no, yeah, I get it, it's just the overlay, right, it doesn't affect the site plan, right, cause there's no site plan at this time, got it, yep.
no, the only change, I mean, it could, I mean, depending on which way the commission went.
Right.
You could vary the applicant's ability in the different zone. You know, so if you were, so let's say, more restrictive in one zone than the other, depending on which way it all fell, the applicant may or may not want then the ARHD. I mean, you know, depending on how the whole thing sort of shook out. You know, I mean, listen, we're prepared to take it up tonight. We can answer the question that you really raised, which is sort of why we really needed it relatively succinctly. But I think the applicant probably would need to reserve the right, depending on how the commission voted, because depending on how you guys go, it may or may not, it may, over the long haul, in the broader sense of the project, it may or may not sense to use
Okay,
the
so
overlay.
then let's just continue this to the same
Same night?
because like you said, if one's contingent on the other, then it does make sense to,
All right, let's
Yeah,
continue with that.
okay.
I don't see any harm in
It
that.
could be, but just for a technical point, a text amendment wouldn't apply until its effectiveness. So if you filed an application, today for the ARHD, it would fall under the current regulations, correct? So if a change is made, limiting or, changing the 80-20, it wouldn't apply today because the text amendment, do you know what I'm saying?
no.
No,
Okay, yeah,
I'm not sure I follow you
Right now
either.
it's 100%.
Right now, it's 100%. So if they applied today for the ARHD, it's under today's regulations.
So what's this?
But I think we're leaning towards keeping it.
No, but what's this though?
That's just looking at the map amendment.
Yeah, but,
The map amendment is the overlay, and it's falling under the current regulations.
which is 100%.
Which is not 100% actually. It is 100%, but the ARHD allows for a spouse to be under 55.
That's-
It
well, I'm
allows
sorry.
for a caretaker who's under 55.
But no percentage.
Correct.
Right.
Carrie, good evening, Joe Porto, also represent the applicant. My question is this. What is the procedure of the commission, and specifically, would it closes the public hearing for the text amendment? Does it then vote and we know the answer, or then would we defer the vote, move into the second public hearing, and then the commission would deliberate and render
So,
it?
once the public hearing's closed, so if we close the public hearing next week, then we have up to 35 days to act on it. So it means that we can have discussions amongst ourselves,
Sorry, 65 days.
65 days, I mean, that's the max, but we have, we can close the public hearing, and then the commission will discuss and, either take it as it is, make changes to it, vote on it one way or the other, up to 65 days. We have that flexibility in time. Not saying that we would use all 65 days, it's possible, but, it doesn't normally go a full 65 days unless there's something that's really, really outstanding.
So you don't vote at the conclusion of the public hearing then?
We could.
Well, I know you could. I'm asking, what is it you do?
Most times you
We typically.
Typically, usually, if not that meeting, it's usually the following meeting. So it's usually, within those, I'm gonna say, if I had to give a percentage, it's 75-25, 75 being, it's at that meeting, 25. Again, there has to be something outstanding, open, maybe, some terminology that we deem, a lawyer should take, our town attorney should take a look at. That would be pretty much the really only circumstances that would carry over. So.
Yeah, I happen to agree. We're contemplating the fact that it's difficult to advise our client on the overlay zone until we know what the commission is going to do with regard to the text amendment.
Right.
And if it treats it differently, then that may affect the manner in which we approach the overlay.
Right, that's what I was
Application.
saying, we keep them both open.
Yeah, and
Well,
we may
yeah.
actually have to wait until you vote.
We have to withdraw one and bring it again, depending on how long it takes the commission to vote.
Yeah, again, it's usually, from what I've seen on this, and I don't like to make any speculation, but this could be a single night discussion.
Which is my experience
I mean,
as well.
Yeah, and like I said, unless there's something really outstanding, or something really pops up, or we need legal advice from our town attorney, would pretty much be the only factors that would carry it over.
Understand. I understand, but I don't want to win the war and lose the battle, or
Right.
whatever, however that saying goes. We ultimately get the application, but it ends up being counterproductive depending on what
But I just
happens.
wanna circle back with Carrie though, but did you understand what she was talking about? Because the text, I mean, the second part of it, the
Understood.
the text amendment would not apply to the second part because his application's already been filed, right?
No. No, all
It's
all
already
I
been-
was saying is
It's
that
fallen under the current, it's fallen under the current
this is for the map, the zone change. The text amendment, though,
Yeah, it's under the ARHD as well. So what I'm saying,
I see what you're saying, but
I'm just, that's
The
all.
amendment to
So
the
here's where-
regulations.
Where I'm going at.
Okay.
When you
If
file
that
the
has to happen
application
first.
for the ARHD.
It's under our current of 100%.
That's fallen under our current regulation.
Of 100%.
So that would not fall under any changes that we
no,
amend.
but they're just proposing to change the map. They're not actually filing an application to
Okay.
build something.
I
Right.
understand.
I think we
Our
get
site
the
plan.
benefit
I got it.
Of the
Okay.
change.
I got it. I just wanna make sure.
Let's just wait, I think let's do it in the order we talked about, let's put everything over, ultimately, whatever you guys decide, the text amendment issues, we can then move forward with the ARHD. I
Okay.
think to do it in an opposite order is premature.
Okay, all right, so you will give us
Grant
you'll
extension.
grant us, another.
Another
2
extension
weeks.
to the same date,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay,
Do you need that?
If you could send an
Yeah.
email to me tomorrow, that'd be
Tomorrow,
great, for
fine, sure.
both applications.
Absolutely, no
That'd
problem.
be great, thank you.
all right, so, thank you very much on
Thank
that.
you for your time once
So,
again, we'll
wait,
see you.
So, application 2018-11, which is currently, which is for 50 Fowler Road, in the ARHD floating zone, including 239 Notch Hill Road, will be also continued to our October 4th meeting at 6:30 here in the chambers. Okay.
We'll see you all then, I'll be in touch tomorrow. We'll
Okay.
Maybe we'll caucus with Barbara, maybe do a conference call
Okay.
and get the,
Who's Barbara again?
your town attorney, your lawyer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
She's with Cohen and
Because
Wolf.
earlier you said, you said town council.
Vincent Marino.
Hey, you-
Vincent Marino, Barbara is doing it now.
Yeah, okay, but you said town council, and I was thinking, town council, I must have missed somebody, got reappointed.
Not CIL,
Yeah.
SEL.
Yes.
Right.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you, guys.
Thanks.
All right,
I'm gonna just turn off that power.
yeah.
the projector.
I just need some help here.
What's that?
I just need clarification, because I'm super,
I'm
I thought I had this under control. Yeah.
Clarification on what?
So, the second part of it.
Yeah,
Yes.
I wanted to understand that.
Yeah, so
better.
Carrie, just before we move on, I just need a clarification.
Yeah. I don't know that we can talk about it.
Oh, I was just gonna ask for
okay,
clarification.
Oh.
Oh.
Well,
No, I was gonna, okay,
Okay.
yeah, I got you, you're right. Okay, so, planning items A, review a text amendment application regarding production and distribution of medical marijuana. That was in your packet, I believe.
oh,
I thought it was.
no?
No? I swear I
I think I
saw
saw
it.
it.
Yeah, it's here. I don't have my glasses, so you.
Oh, no, that's actually, no, that's
Oh, wait
from
a
our
minute.
plan of conservation and development.
I'm
So-
sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
So this I just updated. So,
What are these? Are
if
they
you
all the
just take
same?
one and pass.
Oh, it's a whole.
Yep. So this is, we've been talking about proposed text amendment application, so it has not been submitted yet. It's still in draft and in discussion form, for medical marijuana. And so in your hands right now is a draft text amendment.
I'm sorry, if,
Oh,
did they
excuse
take
me.
it outside, or,
Excuse-
I'm sorry, it's
yeah.
super distracting.
Thanks.
Oh,
So a draft text amendment for section 6, which would define licensed medical marijuana dispensary. One of the questions that the commission had was, what if the regulations change over time? So the town attorney took a look at this, and I just added at the end of
May be
this
amended from time to
definition
time.
as
Yeah.
may be amended from time to time. So that was changed on both the dispensary and the producer
Wait,
definition.
Can I, wait, I gotta stop right here. What am I missing on 6.22? A licensed surveyor, engineer, architect, or landscape architect?
Nothing. Only the items that are in bold are the proposed changes.
No, but what does that mean though?
So 6.22 is the current definition in our zoning regulations. It's just under the word license. It's all alphabetical. So I had placed licensed medical marijuana dispensary under that section, just because it fell under license.
Oh, okay, I got you, all right.
So nothing is proposed to be changed there under license or light trespass. It's just the bold 6.22.1.
No, I was just wondering what a survey and engineer and architect had to do with medical marijuana.
Alphabetically, it falls under license.
I was looking.
That's the only,
Just the alphabet,
I
nothing
thought
more
this,
than that.
no, I just thought this was a.
We always
yeah.
think there's something.
I'm always looking.
So then if you look at the 6.22.2, which is the next stapled portion, that would fall underneath of that, which would be licensed medical marijuana producer. And same situation, nothing else was changed
Just
under the definition, just as may be amended from time to time. And if you go back to the dispensary, which is 42.5.18, licensed medical marijuana dispensary included under use line C-2.1. Take out respectively, that doesn't fit anymore, shall conform to the following special standards, definitions, see section 6, definitions. And under here, 2A, there was a question about how to make sure that it's measured in a direct line. So it stated, a medical marijuana dispensary shall be a minimum of 1,000 feet measured in a direct line from any and all property lines of the facility to the nearest property line of a school, church, or place used for religious worship, or a town-owned playground or park, or any child daycare facility.
That's good, yeah. That's really
So
good.
that measurement
Yeah.
definition is also
Yeah.
stated under the proposed section 42.5.18, which is the medical marijuana production facility.
I think it was good.
Yeah,
So
I
actually,
like
one
that.
thing that I'm realizing right now,
Which one?
this is just a kind of editing, numbering thing. So I have both of these listed as 42.5.18.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if they should be different,
Yeah.
or, so
'Cause
one will
they're
be
under-
18, one will be 19.
Yep.
So we'll have dispensary, just because it's D,
Yeah.
be 18, and then 42.5.19.
Yeah.
Cause I think we
Good
just wanna
catch.
keep them separate because of,
Right.
could have
Yeah.
one as a grower,
Yep.
one as a dispenser.
Good catch.
Good.
I don't think any of us.
Good to go.
And then
Good.
the last page of this is the proposed use chart. So it would be two separate lines, C-2.1, licensed medical marijuana dispensary, and then it would not be permitted in residential. A special use permit would be required in all of the business zones and prohibited everywhere else. And then C-2.2, licensed medical marijuana producer, not permitted anywhere except industrial zones 1, 2, and 3, under special use permit.
Right. And one time we talked about maybe we could take a look at maybe if we didn't want all the industrial zones, but we'll do that at the public hearing site. All right, good to go.
All right, so so now the next question is, I just wanted to get through these outstanding items on this application. Given that we have currently an application with public hearings, do you want to accept the application now, set a public hearing for a month out? Do you want to wait a little bit?
Since it's our regulation, we can just, I mean, if we don't have time to hear it, then we can just keep on, we can push it back on our own. So let's at least get it out there in the public, let's get it out there. And then if you see, we can open the public hearing, right, on the first night, whenever it is, we have to, I believe. And then after that, we can, at our discretion, we can take a look at the agenda, and we can leave it off the agenda and just say there'll be no discussion tonight on this, if there's other stuff.
Okay.
So we can actually put it on the published agenda. But at least we have it, so if in a month, if we only have a couple things going on, maybe we can at least start the discussion. So, I mean, if that makes sense.
When we submit, just for my knowledge, when we submit, I guess anyone, and an application, within how many days do you have to have a public hearing? Is there a law about that?
So
It's gotta be published for 14 days prior?
it has to be published
That's what it
twice,
is.
so we do the week before and then 2 weeks before. So
Okay.
the way, and because we publish in the source, the sound,
Yeah, let's just
if I get the legal notice in next Wednesday, the 26th, it would be published on the 4th and the 11th for the meeting on the 18th.
You could, if you wanna push it back 2 weeks, go ahead. I mean. if
So
you
then
want-
hear it
you
in
just-
November?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's
Do
just
that,
in
yeah,
November.
I mean, yeah, it's,
Okay.
then, yeah, and then we have flexibility over the holidays, yeah,
In
so.
case this runs
Okay.
into
And I
like
can
one
even
more
talk with
public
Pam
hearing.
Johnson, because she, from the sound, she's been asking about where this stands, so she could even get some press out there to
Yeah.
let people know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who handles the patch?
I don't know,
Okay.
yeah. I'm a little, some of the reporting in the patch just is not current.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's where, right.
Well, no, I was just saying the article itself, whatever you're gonna put into the paper, to the
Mhm.
sound, just copy it and send it over to somebody to patch, or
Okay.
paste it up on Facebook or something like
Okay.
that.
Alright, so I'm probably going to look at, one of the meetings in November,
Yeah.
which means
Yeah.
that we wouldn't advertise until the end of October, beginning of November.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay.
All right. Moving on. We have the, update on the plan of conservation development.
Quick summary. So as you know, we received 3 proposals. Harry was on the interview committee of the 3 proposals. One of them dropped out, so and Alex, sorry, was on the interview committee too, with Roger, and myself, and, Mayor Duty. So, long story short, both firms, Mylone McBroom and Fitzgerald and Halliday, were extremely qualified, and it kinda came down to knowledge of the town, having done work in the town, experience regionally, and just seemed like a good fit. So I went to the town council meeting and, made the recommendation for hiring Mylone and McBroom, and they accepted that, so.
Great.
We still have to draw up a contract and everything with them, but we're moving forward. So the plan is to get going on the plan of conservation and development by October 15th.
So were you able to talk to Mike at all about like a steering committee or
A
something?
little bit, yeah, I need to
Okay.
go back to him
Okay.
again.
Alright.
But I also spoke with, Rebecca Auger about it,
Okay.
as far as what she would recommend, and, it's unbelievable. Other towns that she's been working with have huge steering committees, like 13 people.
No, that's not a
Or
committee.
like 15, so I'm aiming for like 5 to 7, I
Yeah.
think
Well,
that'd
I
be
was
good.
thinking 3 to 5, but, well, I
Yeah.
mean, Mike, so the reason why I brought up the steering committee is because just in some of the efforts I do in our work, we have, let's call them business owners. And they don't get into, to the actual project, so what they do is they tap resources and all the, all the resources they need, they take the leads of those, and that's your working group. But then you have a steering committee that they report up to give them, updates of where the project stands, where we're going, what's our next steps, and different things like that. They're that steering committee's just kinda like, they're the overseer of the whole project. They're the
steering
responsible,
wheel.
they're the actual, the responsible party for the whole project. So, I mean, I was thinking maybe, 5 would probably be enough on that, I think. But then,
Right.
then you would tap people, like, I'm just gonna say, then you would tap somebody from economic development, planning and zoning,
Yes. The question is
public works, who those key people,
Wetlands, and
wetlands.
for, you mean for the
land-
steering committee?
No, I'm
Oh,
just
I
talking about,
see.
then you take, then you
Yes.
have your working committee, which
Right.
would be like, could be somebody from public works, it could be another town council member, it might be, it would be somebody from planning and zoning, economic development, parks and recreation, land
Board of Ed,
trust,
maybe.
so
Mhm.
those folks would make up the group that's really gonna do all the, do all the work on it. But the steering committee is just the one that oversees and that other group would answer to, so. I mean, 3 would be good, but 5 is,
Right,
yeah, so whatever might,
Okay.
whatever you guys decide, but
okay,
just that somebody should have, be the the town should be that group
Yes.
is accountable for what comes out.
right.
The other group would be, the ones responsible for putting it together, working
Okay.
with Rebecca and all that.
So help me understand why, so those people would help steer, what the firm is doing?
No, they're
So
just
I'm just confused, like,
responsible,
what-
they're just responsible for the overall project.
And the project being the one that this
The-
firm is doing?
Right, the plan
Right, the
concept-
actual plan,
yeah.
that's,
Cause I'm just getting confused, like, that, like, where do we fit in?
We'd be the working group, we would be.
We're the working group,
Yeah.
okay.
So, and then we would answer to the steering
That's what
committee.
I'm wondering, like,
Yeah,
how is
it's
this,
like
the
a li- it's like a
hierarchy
li-
going?
Yeah, so my thing is that, the last time we did it, planning and zoning kinda led the charge.
Mhm.
And we answered to, town council, but I never felt really comfortable with that.
Okay, so there's this.
We should be.
More diverse
We should be
entity.
working
Yeah,
towards our portion of it. And since it's so encompassing in
I
all the other
gotcha.
departments, that there should be somebody
A
to
representative from
over-
all of that.
Yeah, and there should be somebody overseeing the whole
I
project.
got you, okay, now I
So
understand.
that's where I would really like to see a
Okay.
steering committee, so, we would, whatever our progress is, whatever steps we're doing, we
We
run it
would-
past the steering committee, we just, we
okay.
inform them where we are, how we're progressing,
That makes sense.
and if there's any issues, we can go to them
Yep.
and irons, which I don't think there will be, but they'll be the ultimate ones responsible for the plan of conservation development. Putting the whole thing together. The content, we would be, each of the, folks in the working group and the committees would be responsible for the
I
content.
got you, we're responsible for our piece, yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense now that I understand it better.
All right, moving on. Town planners report.
I don't have any new applications besides our marijuana text amendment,
Okay.
so,
Gary?
oh, yes. So, one question, and I don't think we can take the vote tonight because there's only 2 people here. So, Alex is going to be submitting, an application for the brewery. The question was, and we'll have to do it at another meeting when we have 3 people to
Yeah.
vote, is to apply the application fee from the distillery that never went forward to the brewery application.
Yeah, we have to wait for
So,
one more.
right,
Yeah.
right. So that application would come in the next few weeks. possibly.
fee?
$360?
It's
I believe.
$360, but you said the state, would still have to be paid, so it would just
Exactly.
be the $300 for the town.
All right,
Right,
all right, we'll wait for, next meeting to bring that up.
okay.
All right.
Okay.
Anything else?
No?
Somebody?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
I'll take.
All in favor?